Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on Twitch. This is, well, really, this is kind of like a little bit of a detour, you might say, that we're on, where I'm kind of like, I wanted us to have some debug code, and I kind of got into it a little bit. And so for the past few days, we've been sort of like working on cleaning up the debug presentation so that we could do some fancier things with it. And we sort of did a little bit of that yesterday. We kind of cleared out a bunch of like global stuff and like consolidated the state. And so today, what I'd like to do on Handmade Hero is I'd like to go through and add a little bit more of a UI story. So we kind of set the stage for that yesterday a little bit. And what I'd like to do today is kind of push through that and maybe get us some things like some buttons we can interact with or something like that. Again, so we can do stuff like quickly have access to turning off or on the profile or other things like that. And I'm not sure exactly how we want to do it. So we're kind of just going to push on it a little bit and see what happens. Now I have some ideas. I was kind of thinking about something that I kind of wanted to try potentially that's sort of a little ridiculous, but sometimes ridiculous things are the best things, right? It's hard to know sometimes what it's hard to know. It is hard to know sometimes how these things should go. So I might try something like epically ridiculous, like something so ridiculous that it just has no right working. And then if it does work, we'll just be like, I do not know how that happened, but you know, we're happy that it did, or something like that. I'm not sure. So yeah, so we'll see again, and I don't really know. There's some things about the C++ preprocessor that I suspect that one of the things I would like to do probably is just not possible to do, but I don't know. So you know, we'll see. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Today I think we probably won't get into some of the crazier stuff that I was talking about. That'll probably come maybe tomorrow or the next day. For right now, it's day 191. We're going to be doing some coding. We're going to be probably doing a little bit of UI coding. So if you want to follow along with that, unpack day 190 source code into a directory somewhere. That's what I'm starting with. Again, that's if you pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, you should have access to all that source stuff. That's what you want to start with if you're trying to follow along at home. Let's go ahead over to the code itself and see where we left off. We had just done some stuff with the profile window, and we basically made it so that we could make a little, we could just kind of control the size of the profile window there, right? And that was just sort of a beginning of sort of getting rectangles in and a little bit of that conceptualization there. And that's all good, and it's kind of running in there. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to sort of continue pushing down that direction and say, let's try to get something where now we have some concept of like, you know, various sort of, I don't know if you want to call them widgets or whatever they are, some sort of concept of like pieces of stuff that we want to display, like these things, so that they can be turned on and off, and you know, using some kind of a control, some kind of a thing we could click on, or a menu or something like that. So some sort of a thing like that that we can use to sort of get pieces of the debug code like this in a state where they're not bothering us, right? They're not kind of getting in our way when we don't need them. So we can turn them on, we can turn them off, and that sort of thing, right? So that's what I'd like to start doing. Again, very, very simple, nothing particularly crazy going on here, but that's what I would like to have happen. I'd like to get us into that position going forwards. And again, yesterday we also made sure our loop live code editing worked with the debug stuff. So I believe all of that stuff should work fine. I should also check to see whether our L key stuff works. With the debug, and it does look like it works pretty fine. So that's actually kind of nice too, because it means that we will have the ability to go in there, and if we have kind of bugs that are difficult to repro, if we can get them into a loop, we can look at the perf stuff in there as well. Perhaps even freeze that stuff. For all I know, I'm not sure if that'll actually work or not, though. Probably not. Yeah, I guess we can't. Well, yeah, that's right. We can't. We'd have to sort of think about how we wanted to have that happen, because if we bring that sort of loop live code editing stuff in a little more properly, we're going to have an interesting dichotomy there, which is that the recording is recording all of our input, and so we wouldn't be able to interact with the debug code at all at that point, right? You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting in that sense, and so that's also something that we might want to look at. But all I wanted to make sure, at least at this stage, was that our loop live code editing also worked just fine with that. But it looks like everything's fine in that regard, so we should be good to go. So let's go back over here now and see what we can do in terms of getting some stuff happening. So what I think I'd like to do is I think I'd like to maybe make the right mouse button a bit of a sort of what I would call in UI terms a clutch. I usually use that term to refer to something where it's kind of like I push this thing down and I go into some kind of mode where I'm like able to get at a lot of menus and things. So like what I kind of envision what I want is I just want the game, and the game's just running and doing its thing. And then if I hit the right mouse button, suddenly like a whole bunch of UI pops up that I can pick from really quickly, right? So like some kind of like a radial arrayed menu sort of a thing with like maybe some sections where I can pick things, turn things on and off, that sort of thing. And then, you know, it's if you right click, it just comes up. And then you can pick stuff from it. If you hold down the right mouse button, maybe it lets you sort of just move and then release for like a quick sort of turn on, turn off sort of a situation. I'm looking for something a little bit like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to come on in to our debug stuff here, and I'm just going to start coding that in there, right? And obviously we have something that we can start with, something very simple. I said I wanted to turn on the profile stuff, so again, not going to think too hard about it. I'm just going to add a Boolean here for us that says whether the profile's on or off in terms of whether or not it's displayed, right? And so when I come into the thing that does the overlays and we look in here, it's pretty easy for me to kind of look at this stuff and say, okay, this is all stuff that has to do with that profile. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bracket it in the if. Nothing weird, again, really basic stuff here. I'm going to bracket it in the if. Go ahead and make that predicated on profile on, right? And so now it should actually, if I run the game, it shouldn't even be there, right? Because that on is that's going to default to false. So until that gets turned on, it's not going to be there. And so now our goal is to get some UI in here that will allow us to flip that Boolean into the on state, okay? So again, really basic, really basic thing we want to do. So I'm going to need some information here. I need to have some information about what the interaction is. Like, for example, I need to be able to figure out whether we're interacting, that sort of stuff. Again, one of the important things when you're coding anything, and I try to say this oftentimes, is, and it's kind of evolved a little bit in Handmade Hero. I think before Handmade Hero, I hadn't really crystallized so much exactly what it is I do when I code, which again was one of the big reasons for Handmade Hero. Is I just want to kind of show how do I actually get things done, so that other people who are like, I would like to see how someone gets thing X done, they can at least see how I get it done, which may not be how other people get it done, or may not even be a great way to get it done, but it is how I get it done. And that is in this particular case, and in pretty much all throughout Handmade Hero, I always start at the place where I know what to do, and I work towards the place I don't know. Right? And a lot of times I would say like write the usage code first or things like that, but it is true that if I don't know the usage code, then I actually, but I do know the implementation code, I start at the implementation code. Like what I actually do is I start at the place that is certain, and I move towards the place that is uncertain. It seems like that's a much truer way to state how I actually program than trying to boil it down to a specific rule, which won't necessarily be true in all cases. So it seems like I do tend to start with like, what do I know has to happen? And let's make that. Because that's the thing I'm most likely to get right. And then let me move towards the thing where I'm not really sure what it does. Because by going from something I do know to something I don't know, I advance sort of like I get closer to what I don't know with things I do know and make that jump easier to make conceptually. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do here. If I want to make a radial menu and all this stuff, and I've got, I don't know, UI, and you pick things and it turns things on and off, that's a lot of stuff to think about, right? That's a lot of stuff to consider. And a lot of times people will rat hole, they'll kind of go down and think about it and draw pictures and diagrams and make a UML thing or C++ classes. But they don't really know, and it's kind of, and that doesn't help. It just complicates matters, right? Instead, what I like to do, like I said, is start with something you know. We know how to draw stuff. Let's draw the radial menu. Let's just figure out how to draw the darn thing, right? I'm just going to say we've got a function. I'm going to put it in here. I don't even necessarily care what it's called. I'm just going to say draw radial menu. I don't even know if this should be a function or not. I just want a scratch pad. I just want something to call into where I'm going to get this render group, right, in here. And I want to also have, I guess, my debug state probably. And I'm just going to say in there, I would like to draw myself some kind of a menu. And you know what? Let's not even say radial menu, because what I really want is just the debug, the sort of the debug main menu. It's just it's the thing that comes up when you hit that right mouse button. And then I'm just going to call it, and I'm going to call it all the time. So I'm not even going to think about the UI. The UI is not even on the table at this point. We're just going to straight up do whatever comes to mind for drawing the menu, assuming it's always on the screen. And we'll work backwards from there. So the first thing I need to do is I need some items, right? So again, not going to think about it at all. I'm just going to say I have some menu items. I'm going to pretend I just have them right here. I don't know how many menu items I have. I've got some. Okay. So I've got menu items. And in the menu items, there's just going to be some things that I could select, right? What are the menu items? Toggle profile or output. I don't know, graph. Toggle profile graph. Sounds like a good menu item to me, certainly, right? What else might I want to do? We had that frame rate counter. Toggle frame rate counter, right? That was the thing that was up there. Let's see, loop, mark loop point, right? Of the, if I want to do loop live code editing or something like that. Draw entity bounds, right? Something like that. Draw world chunk bounds or toggle world chunk bounds. Something like that. So I have no idea if those are things we actually want to do. All I know is I need some menu items, so I'm making some menu items. Now we have them, and we are good to go. All right, so if I need to draw menu items, well, I'm going to have to loop over the menu items. That seems like a no-brainer. So here's my menu item index. Right? And then I can get that menu item name, or maybe just text, right? Text of the menu item, one might say. And then we've got menu items plus menu item index. Yeah. So if that's what I've got for the text, I just need to know where I would display that text, right? Because I have ways of displaying text. I've got a thing here which is just debug text out at, right? So that's all good. So if I go in here and I do debug text out at, oops. I know that I've got a point and a string. I just need to know, like, I'm going to put the string at this particular point. So all I have to do there is say, okay, I know the text. That's the text I want to show for my button. So all I really need to know now is where is the actual button? Like, what's the location of it? And so if you think about, if I wanted to do something where it's like a radial menu where they're kind of, like I said, around a circle around the point or something like that, right? Here we go, day 191. If we wanted to do some kind of a radial menu so that I'm like the mouse is here and you go down and you get something like this, and it's got like the menu options, that kind of come up in this sort of fashion, like that. If that's the sort of thing I'm doing, well, we know what the points are. The points are just going to be going around the circle, going around like basically the circle. So whatever the radius of this sort of like radial menu is, however far the distance should be, that's certainly parameterizable. That'd be like an R value. And then we would know that however many of these guys we have, we've got some kind of an N here, which is a number of menu items. I want to make it so that I'm going to divide the circle into that many things, right? So if I have, let's say I've got here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right, of these that I want to lay out. Well, that means I need to make, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 segments of the circle, so I should be able to divide the entire, I should be able to divide the entire tau, right, by 8, and that's how much to advance the angle by as I go. And then, of course, I can always get the arm of the circle, as we talked about before, by just using the cosine of the angle and the sine of the angle. The cosine, of course, gives us the x-coordinate. The sine gives us the y-coordinate as we go around the circle. And multiplying these guys by the radius will move us out from the unit circle out to the outer circle where we want to be. So I should be able to get the point to start the text at there. Now, we have an additional concern if we want to make this menu look nice, and that is that we want to probably center the text around that point, whereas what we've got right now is something that starts at that point like as a baseline and does that. So our circle is going to be wonky and it's going to look kind of like that at first. But that's not the end of the world. That's totally fine to get it going, and then we'll look at how we might fix the sort of centering issue as a separate thing. All right, so I'm going to do exactly what I just said. Again, really, really straightforward. Here is the text P that I want to create. We've got in our Handmade math, we already sort of set up how we're going to call these sorts of things. I don't know if I ever made an arm function. Looks like I didn't make an arm2. Arm2 is a very common thing that I do. It might be in here, I suppose, but I doubt it. Yeah, it's not. So what I will often do, I just find this is a really handy function, is I will often make a v2 function here for a two-dimensional vector like this, and it's just called arm2, and you pass in the angle, and all it does is it returns you the vector that is the cosine of that angle, and the sine of that angle. That's all it does. And so what that does is it makes the sort of the unit arm with this as the angle, it makes a unit arm in that direction, starting, again at x equals 1 and kind of going around the unit circle. And so if I know that I've got, an angle step of however many of these menu items I have, if I know that however many menu items I have times the total distance around the circle, what I should be able to do is I can find that angle, whatever the angle I'm at, by just saying however many menu items I've gone through so far, I would like to be that far around the circle, right? Again, very, very straightforward. So then I can just turn that into an arm with arm2, and then take whatever the radius of my menu is, which again is something that we can just parameterize. I don't know what it should be, but maybe it's probably should be more than that. But however many 200 pixels, something like this, we take that menu radius and we multiply it by the arm, and that's where the text should be. And so once we have that, again, it's really simple to kind of just place it there. And then we're pretty much done for all intents and purposes. Oops, don't know why I did that. Don't want a pointer to the pointer. I just want the actual pointer. So if I do that, you can see that I've now got my radial menu. Again, like I said, it's not really centered properly, I don't believe. Although actually, it kind of looks like it is. Did we actually do... But that's weird. That doesn't seem like... I gotta say, I'm a little surprised at how that looks. I'm gonna draw my circle. I feel like it's good to draw my circle. I'm gonna do a push rect, just so I can see the circle a little bit better, just so I can understand what's going on there, because that doesn't look like what I was necessarily quite expecting. I want to make sure I don't have a bug, right? So I'm just going to take a quick look at what happens if I do a push rect here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grab a push rect. I'm going to stick it in so I can just see what my circle actually looks like. So I'm going to do a rectangle, center. Remember what we called these? Min, max, rect min dim, center half dim. So center half dim is just going to be at the text P, and then I'll just do something that's I don't know, 2 pixels or 3 pixels. So it's actually I guess we'll just do one that's 2 pixels on either side, something like that. I don't know. Maybe we'll do a little bit more, something like that. So there's my region rect. Again, and then I can just drop this right in place of that. So there we go. That'll draw what we want, I think. And the color of this, I'll just draw it in white. White's fine. All right. So there's my circle. And yeah, I guess it is really, it's a circle. There it goes. It's just kind of not intuitive. Like when it's on the baseline, it's really hard to see how that circle works. But you know, you can actually see that is a nice inscribed circle there. So I think that's just about right. Okay. So again, I don't know what the first thing is we should tackle there. But I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to maybe start to think about text as having a particular rectangle that we can access. And the reason that I'd like to do that is because I want to sort of take text and be able to, like I said, I want to center the text around that point potentially. That's what I'd like to do. And so what I'd like to have is a way of getting the dimensions of the text. Now we already have a debug text out function, right? And so I could make this so it kind of just has an ability. I also think I probably want one of these that takes the font and takes maybe the render group, right? Something like this, you know? I'm not entirely sure how I want to do that, but so you know what? We're gonna leave that for just 1 second. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna assume that I have you know, something like this going on, and then we're gonna address that in a second. So if I come through here, you can see that it's basically the exact same code as what this would be, right? It's the same code as text out. But what we would do is when we actually go to output a glyph, we would want to include that in our rectangle, right? We need to do all this exact same code. And so I can just make a thing here that's like, you know, internal rectangle 2. Oops, rectangle. That's like get text dimensions, or I don't know, something like that. But I really don't want to do that. And the reason I don't want to do that is because I'm afraid that these two pieces of code will fall out of sync. So what I'd rather do is maybe make one function here that's like, you know, I'll take debug text out and we'll make that sort of be a wrapper here. And then I'll take this and make this be something like debug, you know, do text op or something, or debug text op. And what that'll do is that will take some of this information in, but then what it actually does will be dependent on some kind of an operation code. Okay, so it'll be something that's like sort of the sort of uber text function. You know, it'll take this stuff like so. What is the font info actually used for? It's getting, okay, for the horizontal advancement, that sort of stuff. So that will take all this stuff and it won't need to do any of these, and it'll do this. And then when it kind of comes down through here, all of this code would be the same, right? That would all do exactly what you would expect it to do. But then at the very end, it would sort of have some opinion about what was going to happen here. Instead of doing a push bitmap, it would actually just do some kind of an if on the op about whether it was gathering information or actually drawing, right? And so, you know, I'll do something like say, okay, if op equals draw text or something, if the op is to draw text, then we'll do it. Else, I guess right now we'll only have one other op, text op, size text or something. And what I want to do here is include in my rectangle, again, that sort of the part of the other rectangle that's actually here, right? So what I want to know on this push bitmap call is I want to know for that push bitmap how big the actual bitmap is going to take up, because I sort of have the dimensions here, right, for it. So I know how big it should actually be. So I should be able to just go ahead and reverse that out, right? So if I go into here, handmade code, render group, if I go to push bitmap, you can see that it's kind of got a thing that it does here to figure out exactly what it's going to do in terms of like how things are aligned and where they're going to go. And so what I would like to do is I'd like to get some way of accessing that information in a way that doesn't involve me actually calling push bitmap, right? So what I want to do is pull that out, right, as something that I can access separately. So something like bitmap dim or something, or like bitmap, used bitmap dimension or something like this, where this stuff here can be received in a reliable way. And so if I did that, we would just, it would get one of those, like so, and it would just be exactly that code, and it would be like get used bitmap dim or get bitmap dim, something like that. It would take exactly what happens here, right? So that stuff is all used. I don't know that it actually needs the render group, probably because the basis is going to be important there. So I assume that we would do something like this. Yeah, I assume we would do something like this. And so then there's the basis as well, I guess, would also be part of that. So you get back the basis, the size, the alignment, you get back all that stuff. And then I guess, yeah, I guess that's really all that would need to happen. As far as I can tell. That looks about right. And so we would just do something like this. Use bitmap dim, dim size, dim align, dim p, yeah, and then the basis. So now we know that code has been kind of pulled out, and we can use it whenever we want to figure out what would actually happen with this stuff. So then this guy can just be changed to actually use that, right? So he can do something like get bitmap dim, and he doesn't do any of that stuff anymore. He uses this as sort of a pass-through, passes the same things that he was passed. We get that information back, like so. And then I think we're good to go. Yeah? Yeah. So that's also dim basis. That's also dim basis, but that's about it. And so then somebody in here could easily do that instead. So instead of calling push bitmap, it'll just get the dimension. And again, pass the exact same stuff. So I guess I have to pass these things here. So I'll just have like something like bitmap scale or something like that. Bitmap scale. And bitmap offset. And now I've pulled those out into common computations as well. So then I know, again, that these two can be very, very, very similar code paths that will not fall out of sync, right? OK, so now I can get that dimension back. And let's just double check. I want to make sure that this actually works at all. So let's actually clean up the compile errors here and get it to the point where we're fairly confident that it's working. All right, so just clean that up. And then go ahead and make this work with the text out stuff. And so I'm just going to introduce a thing up here where we just have something like emon debug text operation, or just let's call it op. Debug text op, raw text, debug text op size text. And that way we can just pass that operation in, what do we expect to do to this guy? And maybe I'll actually put that more primal. So after you kind of get, maybe you pass that as the first thing that whatever you're going to do. Oops. And now, whoops, what is the problem? Oh, right. we need to actually get the loaded bitmap, don't we? So that's actually passing the bitmap ID here, you know? So that's a little trickier, right? Because if we have to get the actual loaded bitmap, that can always fail. But as far as I know, we will actually need that bitmap information, because that stuff is not actually in the bitmap info, it's in the bitmap itself, right? So there isn't really any way that we can short circuit that process. We would have to be able to do it where we kind of see what it is. So I think what I'll probably do is say, since we don't care very much about this sizing, if the asset that we're trying to size isn't there, we won't bother, because it won't re-render this frame anyway. We'll just assume that we don't actually care about that, at least for the time being. So I guess what we'd say is, we'd say get bitmap, like so. And then we would just go ahead and try to get the dimension of that thing, of the bitmap. And if we don't get the bitmap back, we just assume that we don't actually process that piece of text. That seems fair enough, right? So if we want to do it that way, we just come in here, and we can call this now. And again, like I said, I kind of want this stuff to be a little bit more sane. I would like this stuff to be a little bit cleaner than it is. So I might also do a little bit of cleanup there. So we're going to go ahead and pass the fact that we're trying to draw the text. We'll pass the debug state, the render group, the font, the info, the p, and the string. Okay. So that should be everything. And if we run that, we get what we expect, so everything's fine. So now what I want to do, again, I'd like to quickly clean this up. This stuff doesn't have to happen every time, right? So the debug state itself, when it actually goes ahead and does this debug state right here, once we have the render group, we could just say that we also have our font stuff. So what I'm thinking is we just say, okay, the debug font is here, and the debug font info is here as well. And we just say that when we do the debug begin thing, right? Debug start. I don't know why I called it start and not begin. That's just kind of weird. I usually call things begin. It just seems like a mess up. You know what I mean? But what are you going to do? So yeah, if I go in here, when we actually sort of do our render begin, when we actually start the rendering happening, where we do begin render, at that point we have a valid ID for our render group passes, and so I should just be able to do this right here. You know, I should just be able to say, okay, we're going to do a push font, and we're going to do a get font info, so that we just have that information available, like so. That's all I really wanted to do with that. That's basically it, right? And so then when debug text op comes in here, really all it has to do is see whether it had a font or not. It doesn't need this stuff to be passed to it. It doesn't need any of that stuff. It can just assume that it got that. Oops, you know what I should do? I should have done it a little bit differently. What I'd like to do is just grab those out like that, and then just do debug state, render group, loaded font, debug font, HHA font, debug font info. Okay, and I'm just going to do a check on the font. If we got the font, then we assume we are good to go. And can keep on trucking, right? I could also, if I'm feeling really frisky, I could actually just go in here and also do that, where we sort of say, okay, and in fact I could just do it this way as well. Assuming that you have both of those, you're set to go to town. Okay, so that should do it, I think, and that will sort of get us out of the business of having to check all those things and load them in every time. So we have loaded fonts, we have HHA font info, or what is it? HHA font. And that's all we need. So let's take a look. Debug font, that's wrong. Debug state. Okay. So debug font. This stuff doesn't need to pass any of this now. That can all go away, so it just looks like that, which is much saner. I think I kind of want that to be first. Don't ask me why, just personal preference. Oops. And then that looks good. All right, double check, make sure I didn't break nothing. All right, so that's all good. Everything is copacetic. So, now that I've got that straightened out, I should be able to get the dimensions of this font pretty easily. When I get back this bitmap dimension thing, you know, that is going to tell me exactly what rectangle I actually need to think about, right? Because, let's see where that is at. Use bitmap dim. Let's get that up in here, where it can be more easily used. So use bitmap dim is going to have all the information we need, right? It's going to have the transform basis. I don't know if we should save the input p, but I don't know. We will for now. But anyway, so if we have this stuff, this is sort of the transformed version, and it's got the size, the alignment, and so on. I guess we do want these because they kind of tell us where what things were in the sort of original space before we transformed it. So if I just want to get the dimensions out of that, what I want to use is the size and the p for that, right? So I can do a rectangle that's like, you know, the glyph dim. And I think what I should be able to do is say I want to rect min dim, where I say whatever it told me the p was and whatever it told me the size was, that's that's the bounding thing in the input space of that glyph. And then I can say if I was trying to get a rectangle out of this guy, right? I'll just stick rectangle return in for now. We might want to do something a little fancier later, but we'll do a result here. Inverted infinity rectangle, like so. And then I will just return it. So we start with nothing. We start with the rectangle that contains the opposite of anything. And then every time through here, I would just do whatever that result rectangle is. I'd take that glyph and I'd include it. So what I want to do is say I want to union these together, right? I want a union of the existing thing and the new thing. And that, you know, if I just keep unioning those together, I should get eventually what I actually want. Entity basis result p looks like for some reason it's still down in here. That's just oversight on my part. Okay. Let's see. Rectangle 2 is what we actually have, right? Yeah. My bad. Rectangle 2 and rectangle 2i. Oh, we only have one or the other, huh? Where's my inverted infinity rectangle when you need it? Inverted infinity rectangle 2i. Do we have? So we don't have. I think I want that to be like, you know, I think I want one of those for everything, right? I want a rectangle 2 version of that for sure. So I probably want a 2i and a 2 so that I can return that. Do I have? I do. Look at that. Okay. So I'm going to go look at the rectangle 2 code and just stick this kind of in there. There it is. So now I've got that, and I can go fix this situation. This is going to be like that now, yeah? And off we go. So this is a 2i. This is a 2. That's 2. Rectangle min dim. Aren't these both v2s? I guess dim p is not. So we'll convert him. Don't know why we can't convert him. We'll take a look at, we must not have one of those. And then we want union, we want to have one of those for our rectangle 2 as well. So it looks like we did some of these for rectangle 2i's, but not for rectangle 2. Again, this is why I say this sort of thing, normally I would metaprogram. If you like using templates and you're okay with them, templates will solve this problem for you as well. So, you know, just so you know, this is the exact same code. There's nothing happening differently here. So normally you just go ahead and you generate that because there really isn't any, there isn't any magic to it, right? So, okay. Let's take a look. Okay. Oops, forgot one. It happens. It happens. Believe you me. And finally, we don't have a way, I guess, to convert from a v3 to a v2, which is just, seems like an oversight, right? You want to be able to just go, oh, you know, you got a v3 as input. No problem. Just copy the members we do have, and out it comes. All right. Again, running just fine. Everything seems kosher. Now we can use this function and see whether we've actually done anything useful or whether we have just made a giant mess of everything by saying, okay, we've got text out. Let's also make sure that we have debug get text size or something. And again, that is just going to take exactly the same two things here. So in fact, I guess we don't really need the p either. We can just say we've got a string and, oops, we've got a string. And we are going to make the result be debug text op, debug text op size text. We will place it at 0, 0, and that is all we will do. Yeah, need to pass the debug state. Okay. So if we do that, we should now be able to draw the boundaries of our text and see if they're at all accurate, right? So we should be able to now do something like we get a rectangle 2 back that's like our text box, right? We go ahead and use the same string, and then we could draw that, right? We should be able to draw a push rect outline. Where we, or you know what, we can even do just a regular push rect for now, since we don't have a push rect outline that takes a rect, I don't think. And I'll just go ahead and make, you know, some kind of a dark bluish backdrop around the text that we can look at and verify that it's in the right place. So I'll just go ahead and pass the text bounds to that, and that should do it. So now we can see where we're at. Oh, and of course I should probably put them at the right location as well. So I should probably offset this guy by whatever the text P actually is. I assume we have an offset function. Don't really know. It looks like we have one for rectangle 3, but not for rectangle 2. Let's see here. So we just need this guy. And that's about it. None of the two overloads could convert rectangle 2 and V to offset. So it's actually that way. There you are. And that's it. Hey, look. That is pretty much exact, right? And so, again, that was a pretty good transformation that I did there. Again, good code transformation to know. If you want to do the exact same piece of code but have two different results come out of it, sometimes, especially if you're not super concerned about the performance of that, since this is the debug code, we certainly aren't, oftentimes it can be much nicer to go, let's write it once, let's pass the operation through as something to do. And what this is really doing is it's getting, it's sort of a way of working around C's limitation of not having a good way to do things like, say, closures, where you can just pass some entire set of stuff you want to do down through some function that does things to it. Functional programming languages have a lot of other things that you can do that make this less of a necessary thing. But again, C, C++, not designed by the smartest folks, not the brightest bulbs on the tree, so they, of course, added like 8 billion language features and just only recently addressed some of these, and of course addressed them in like the worst and most awkward way possible. And so, your mileage may vary if you decide to try and do that. So I tend to still stick to the C way of doing things, which tends to actually just work out a lot better in practice, which is to just pass an opcode through, and off you go. So there you go. So now that we have that, if we actually wanted to center, again, which was kind of the original goal of having that, so now we can kind of get our text bounds and all that sort of thing. Centering is really pretty trivial at this point, because we know what the text B is and we know what the bounds are. So all we really have to do is just take what those bounds actually are. We would just say get the dimension of the text bounds, and we just subtract half of them off, right? And that would line us up with the center. And so now you can see there's the point, and you can see that the text is perfectly centered around it. Again, we still kind of are drawing the size of it originally at the location, which we don't really need. We can get rid of that now. And in fact, I can just get rid of the whole thing, if that makes sense. So that's, again, pretty cool, right? Now we've got sort of a radial menu there that's centered around the point. We can double check that everything kind of works fine by just saying, let's say we've got a lot of items there, and there they all are, right? And that's all good. Again, we got to sort of think more about maybe how we're going to lay this out exactly, because things at the top are more problematic than things at the bottom. So we might want to not, just because the way of text works. So we may need to do some other things there, but for the moment, everything seems to check out just fine. Let's also just go ahead. It seems pretty straightforward as well to just go ahead and make it so that you can pick things. When we come in through here, we've got, again, that mouse P, the location of the mouse, right? So it'd be pretty free for us to go ahead and pass a mouse P in to the actual function. If we wanted picking in here, again, really, really trivial. There's that mouse P. When we come through here, we just want to know which of the menu items are you closest to, let's say. So all we have to do is just keep a best distance. And the best distance, of course, would start out at the highest thing. Then what we do is we maybe say best menu index, something like that, right? And again, this is just quick and dirty. And then tomorrow, because I guess we got about 10 to 12 minutes left on the clock. So I just want to, no sense in burning 12 minutes. I might as well implement something in the 12 minutes. We start out with some kind of a notion of what the best menu index is, and then I come through here and I say, as we go through, and maybe what I do with the best menu index is also set it to something that's not actually valid, like that, right? So you have the best menu index, we go through, And now we're just going to see like who is actually, and you know what, maybe also just say, let me call that hot menu index or new hot menu index, something like that. So we'll figure out what's the hot menu index. We know where the text is because we can go in here and say, all right, let's bake in that thing where we're going to draw it, right? That's where we're going to draw it. Oh, you know what? I guess we don't really want that though. We want to leave it this way, I guess. So that's the center point of the text, which is probably what we want to actually measure. Although, you know, we also have the text bounds. So I guess we could just do how close you are to the bounds. I don't know what the best one is to do. I'm going to do the simpler one first, but I'm not sure which one I want. Either one of them is actually really simple. So we'll just do text p for now. We'll just do text p for now. So we got distance. If we go to our math library, right, I think we've got distance between or something like this, or a length, right? Yeah, so we've got length squared. And we'll make this best distance squared. So I can just do what's the length squared between the text p and the mouse p. And that's this distance squared. If the best distance squared so far that we've come across in all of the buttons is greater than the distance that we see here, then this must be a closer menu option, right? And then I just say that that's going to be the new one that I'm going to take. So once I have that information, now I know which menu item is hot on this round through. And so when I get to the end here, I could just say, oh, OK, I now know which menu item is hot. And maybe I want to have that sorted here or something. So I say like best menu index or something, or hot menu index, you know? And then I say, all right, I've got my debug state hot menu index equals new hot menu index. There we go. And for the last thing that we'd want to do, OK, debug text out at has a slight issue to it. I realize we don't allow it to change color at all, which is probably not what we want. So we probably should do a color thing here, what we pass in. And then when it's doing its color, instead of initializing it, it just initializes it to that. And then if you use some of those overrides, it can still override it. But that way we can at least specify what we want the color to be. So that's all good. When we come in here to our renderer, we can now choose to render in a different color. So what I'll do is I'll just say, OK, we've got a menu item color. So this is the item color here. The item color is just going to be, I don't know, white for now. But in the event that this menu item index that we're on is the debug state's hot menu item index, so it's what the person's hovering over, then we could just say, let the item color equal something that's going to show that it's selected, like a yellow color or something like that. Then we can just pass that in when we draw the text, right? So I'll pass in the item color, and then I got to go make sure that passes through. Length squared. Oops, wanted the distance between those two. And debug text out at needs to take that color and pass it through. So there we go. And you know, now we know what the person's picking, right? Whatever they're closest to is what they're picking at the moment. So that's again pretty easy. You know, nothing really to say about that other than it's really easy, right? You saw it happen. Make a little radial menu, not particularly difficult. And if we really want to, right, we can just kind of finish things up again. Maybe we just end today just with before you know we go any further with that. Maybe what we do here is we just say, oh yeah, you know, too, we can also ask about that precedness, the precedness, if you will. Maybe I just go ahead and stick that in here for now, since we don't really have anything better to do with our lives or ourselves. We will just do something like this. So we'll grab this in here. We'll first take that mouse P, and then what we'll do at the end is we'll say, you know, if you press the mouse button on one of these guys, it'll do the option. And maybe I want right down or right up kind of a thing. Maybe I want it to go. Yeah, you know, let's just. I mean, again, we're just sketching this out. It's not hard, so we'll just go ahead and say, all right, there's menu active, and that's all there is. So I'm going to take it back. I don't think we're going to bother with any of that. We'll just pass in the mouse P, and that's fine. And then we can just out here implement that debug menu stuff. So again, this will be really, really simple. All we have to do is say if input mouse buttons, platform button right is down, ended down. Then draw the debug menu, right? And the other thing that we kind of need to do here is we need to make sure that we're centered around something logical. So, well, I guess we don't need to do that quite yet, but we'll talk about that in 1 second. So we'll draw the debug menu, and then what we can do is say if it didn't, if it's not, right, if the platform mouse button right ended down, blah blah blah. If we know that it was up, then let's just see if the half transition count is greater than 1, right? Because if the half transition count is greater than 1, it means that they let go that frame, right? And so if they let go that frame, we would want to potentially execute something. And so what we can do is we can just say, all right, fine. Let's see what, let's see what you actually hit. What'd you actually hit? And there's a little something. We probably almost want to do that because we want to process the last mouse movement, I would think. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as well, right? Because you don't want to, on the frame where they let up, we want to look at what that mouse P is and find what the closest thing was this time before we process it. And so I'm just going to see if the menu item 0, we have toggle profile graph. That's actually a thing. So we can actually process that one. We can just go ahead and say, all right, if that's the case, then the debug state profile on equals not debug state profile on. Right, so again, pretty straightforward. Nothing particularly odd happening here, but I should be able to do this now in theory. Although I'm not actually seeing that happen. I wonder if this case is not quite hitting right. Input mouse buttons, platform mouse button right, half transition count greater than 0. That should have worked. Why did that not work? Is the question. So I would like to know. Also, I suppose another thing we should say here is these things don't have to happen anymore. While I'm in the neighborhood, I'm just hanging out. Ain't no thing. Might as well get rid of that. Okay. I'll get rid of that to do. It was a stupid to do anyway. So I just want to see what's happening here, why we never hit my case. Does this case not happen? It does happen. Hot menu index is 1. Really? Oh, I was picking the wrong one. I'm kind of dumb. Kind of dumb that way. Yeah, so our radial menu is now sort of operational, but obviously we've kind of got a couple other things we might want to do. Oh, you know what too? We have that right mouse button pressed pause thing. Let's just go ahead and make that on the menu. Yeah. And so we'll just do pause debug collation, or toggle debug collation. So that's really all we need there now for those two things. And so the only thing I was going to say is it doesn't come up where we click the mouse button. It always comes up in the center, right? So what I'd like to do is say, okay, if it ended down, right, then I'd like to do the same thing here where we have, like, if the half transition count was greater than 0, that means they, like, clicked it. They clicked it. And so what I'd like to do is say the menu P, right, our menu P at that time when it first goes down is going to be wherever the mouse was at that point in time. You know what I'm saying? So there's just this concept of the menu P where it should be. And then in here, whenever we figure out where the text actually is, we're just going to offset that by whatever the menu P is. That way the menu can move around with the mouse and is more like a normal radial menu, you know? So now, you know, if I look at the full screen version of this, I can kind of go anywhere I want to, right? And do toggle profile graph or toggle debug collation, right? So now I actually have a fully functional radial menu. Just not very pretty yet, so we should probably do a little work on it. But I've got a radial menu, and it only took a few minutes. What'd that take? 30 minutes, 45 minutes? I don't know how long we started into that, but pretty straightforward, right? Not much. All right, so again, sort of wrapping up, we have a lot more work to do before we would actually consider this UI in a state that I'm going to be happy with it, because right now it's kind of very disparate. I don't like the fact that the menu items are separated from these things, and it's a little, it just, all we did was just put in the base code for using it. And so this is going to be a fairly classic compression-oriented programming style thing I'm going to do here. Next time, on tomorrow's Handmade Hero, we'll start to pull out some of what we just implemented into something that's a little more coherent by sort of lifting up a little bit. But that's the basics. And now we have a radial menu, and radial menus are good. And so we can continue to kind of like explore that as we go forwards. Let's go ahead and go to the Q&A. So if you have questions about what we've done on today's stream, please post them to the chat now. Put a Q colon in front of it so I can see it. I think you added v3.xy for v3 to x to v2 conversion. Ah, I did. You're right. I think I did. That's smarter, isn't it? Past me was smarter than future me. Past me was smarter. That's just better, because then you control which ones you grab. Right? Yeah. Even if the menus in the circle get cluttered, we could make it so that each button in the circle led us to another circle layer subset of buttons. Yeah, I'm not, like I said, I'm not sure what I want to do with this yet in terms of, 'cause I'm gonna see what options we actually end up having in there, but we'll kind of get there once we haven't really figured out how we're even gonna lay out things in this circular menu yet. So next time we'll dive in a little more, and as we go, we'll kind of figure out how we want the menus to work. Sherlock93, can you explain a bit more on the closure stuff and how to do it in C? I didn't quite understand it. So the closure stuff is just if I have something where I'm going to say, what's a good example? So let's say I have something like do complex iteration over things, and I'm going to do some iteration where I walk a tree. In fact, you know what? You don't even have to guess. I'll just load up some actual Handmade Hero code that actually has to do this. And then you should be able to see what I'm talking about. OK. So do you see this thing here? Get world chunk, for example. So get world chunk, what it does is it looks through a list. And it figures out which world chunk it wants by comparing each thing. It first figures out the hash. It goes into the right slot in the hash. It then goes through and compares and tries to find a particular one. If it didn't find one, it will get a new one and all this other stuff, right? There's all these things that it does. And so if you wanted to write something now where you were like, I want to write something that just does something to everything in this list or something like that. Or, something that maybe, you know what? I'm not even sure that's the best one. That might not be the best one to illustrate it because there's a slight twinge to that one that makes it not as good. What's the best place in hand? I got it. I got it. So. At least I think I got it. Okay. So let's say we were to take something like this. So here is a very complicated thing. Draw a rectangle slowly, right? Here's a very complicated function. It does a ton of stuff. It then has a bunch of code inside where it basically says, okay, it does a bunch of work to figure out all the pixels and whether the pixels were highlighted and all this stuff. And then inside it has what is essentially a shader. It has the code that's like, for a given pixel, I want to compute what the color should be. How do I do that? And that's all in here. Now, if we wanted to make multiple shaders, right? The logical way you would do this is you would have, in your programming language, a way to say, oh, by the way, I want you to just have a way for me to say, all of this external iteration code, just make that code be a reusable chunk, and I just want to replace this part here. So I'm going to stick something in here that's like, do the stuff, semicolon, and then I want to be able to call, quote unquote, this function and tell you what to replace do the stuff with, and so that it can access all of this information, right? That's like the most basic use. That's not even a closure. That's just a macro almost, right? But oftentimes that thing itself wants to have access to a separate stack frame. So it wants to have access to variables that are not necessarily known by this function. So for example, let's say that one of these is the normal mapping thing, and it needs access to the lighting environment. Whereas the other way we might call it doesn't do any lighting, so it doesn't need access to that. So what we would want to do is pass in not just the code to execute, but also a little stack frame, a little set of data that goes with it that it can just go ahead and do, right? And so, you know, other programming languages have a variety of things like closures, which allow you to encapsulate the data that's referenced by something, by a piece of code, into itself to be passed through to somebody else where they can do stuff with it, and then it can come back to you and have done the things that it needs to do in your stack frame, right? It allows you to kind of mix these stack frames together in a very useful way. It allows that, but more importantly, it is also just even separate from the closure part of it, the fact that you can sort of pass code into something and have that code execute inside another piece of code is something that C can't do. And C++ recently added lambdas, which kind of allow you to do some of that stuff. And that is the thing that I was saying we don't have if we don't want to go down the C++ nightmare route. So what I did is sort of the poor man's version of that. What I did is say, okay, let's just put in that place where we would, which right here, in that place where we would have wanted to pass in the thing to do, we'll actually just put all the code in there and just have a variable that tells us which one to do. And since branches are relatively cheap, it probably isn't that bad, right? So that's what we did. And of course, we don't have full closures, so these things cannot do anything like have data that comes through that only they know about, like the thing I was saying before. They can't really talk to someone else's stack frame or do any of the convenient stuff like that we might want. But like I said, for a poor man's version, it's totally usable. Hopefully that makes some sense. Why did you use Radial Menu, Radial Menu? Why did you use Radial Menu over list or other format? I didn't. I just know I at least want a Radial Menu. We will probably also put in a list. The Radial Menu is good for quick picking, so I probably want to have Radial Menus for just quick turn on and offs, and then I probably also want a more like linear drop-downy sort of a situation for picking other things. So we're going to do them all. Elvin, it would be cool if the menu items are aligned with the circle borders. That way there's less chance of text colliding. Yeah, we should also wrap the text a little bit, so there's more stuff we want to do there. Elvin, you mentioned C doesn't officially support closures. Did you ever make an attempt to hack it, maybe by functors or something like that? Not really, although I do oftentimes do the thing where I have multiple managed stacks, like you've seen me do on Handmade Hero, and some of that sort of gets into closure-y territory. But no, I've never tried to hack closure specifically in any real way. Have you ever considered a debug output for the stream where we can see your keystrokes? You mean like something that sort of just puts like Control-G at the bottom when I hit Control-G or stuff like that? No, I haven't really, and most of the reason for that is I'm not an Emacs. I'm not a passionate Emacs user, so I don't really care if people learn how to use Emacs. I mean, hopefully there's some better editor to use soon. Maybe if Mr. Fourth Dimension gets for coder up to speed, we can just be using that instead. But yeah. Elvin, oftentimes when using someone else's API engine, you end up having to fight with it to have it do what you want from it. Do you think that is a sign that one should leave that API and try another, write his own, instead of fighting all the time? It's a tough question. The answer is that it depends. A lot of times that's true. You know, if you're using Unity or something, you're probably going to spend a lot of your time fighting with it or whatever, and it's just like you're making a trade-off of basically saying, yeah, this thing is not going to be architected to do what I want to do. It's just this kind of thing that is whatever it is, and I'm rolling the dice and saying that I bet that I can save time in the long run by using Unity because of all the code they've written for me, versus all of the aggravation and time I'm going to have to spend trying to get it to do certain things that it's doing wrong or that doesn't do right for my game. And you're making that judgment call, right? So sometimes I would say, no, it doesn't mean you should switch, right? It doesn't mean you shouldn't use Unity, because the total time to develop the game may still be shorter if you use Unity than if you don't, right? Especially if you're not a very experienced programmer or something like that, right? So sometimes you have to think of the fighting as the cost of not having to write the code yourself, and it may end up being a win, right? Again, it all depends. Other times, if you're really fighting with it and it's not working, it may be the fact that, like, okay, Unity just can't do this. You're going to end up basically rewriting almost the whole thing yourself anyway in C# here or whatever, just to work around all the things that it doesn't do right that you need it to do. And then, yeah, it was a bad idea to like keep using that thing, you know? And unfortunately, that's a really very tough decision, especially for a novice game developer to make. Knowing which one of those is going to be true is very, very hard. And it's closely related to another similar decision, which is what thing to use, library, engine, right? For example, you're a novice game developer, you don't have the skills to make an engine. Should you use Unreal Engine or Unity, right? Or Game Maker? And, you know, unless you've built things in all three, it's very hard to know the answer to that question, right? Because, yeah, you will fight. All three of those you will fight because things that you will want to do, it will not do in the way you want to do them or the way that your game needs them done. That will happen. Which one of them will be the least fighting, right? And so it's definitely the case that those are all very hard decisions. Fighting is definitely a sign that the thing doesn't do what you want it to do the way you want it to do it, but that doesn't mean you need to stop. It means you just need to be aware of it and understand that everything is a cost-benefit trade-off. And if you start to sense that writing maybe a particular component from scratch or a whole thing from scratch is going to be the better way to go, then you need to do that, right? And that's, again, unfortunately, the kind of thing that's very difficult for a novice programmer to make, because it's about experience in a lot of sense, and there's really, without being burned a few times and seeing how you get burned, it's oftentimes hard to know just how hot the pan is, right? So that's an issue, certainly. What I would say and this probably doesn't go for any of those things, because in those cases, I think most of the time if you're fighting it's probably because it's janky. There are certain cases, very limited cases, but certain cases, where you're fighting the API because you actually don't know what you're doing. And an example for this of this is probably like when I was, say, 20 years old. If you had shown me the I/O completion ports API in Windows, I probably would have said it was stupid. And I would have had to fight with it to get it to do what I wanted it to do. Nowadays, I think the I/O completion port API is like pretty darn close to perfect. And that is just because I get how a certain type of code should be written now, and I get what it needs to do to be performant, and I get what it needs to do to be properly multi-threaded. And until you know all of that stuff, a very well-designed API may actually seem stupid or confusing or that it has something wrong with it, but it's actually you who are incorrect. That happens fairly rarely, but once in a while it does happen. And you know, I suppose it's not a surprise that the IO completion port API is an example of something like that, because that was designed by some really, really great operating system guys, like back in the Dave Cutler days. So, you know. Are you ready for the world to end tomorrow as predicted by Crazy Christians? No, I would prefer that it did not end tomorrow. I would really like to ship our first game, Molly Rocket. So if they could hold off on the end of the world until after we do that, I would really like that a lot. PSI 9, since Draw Rectangle Quickly is its own translation unit, are you going to write that code in straight ASM instead of C intrinsics? Probably not. Although if we wanted to try that as just an exercise sometime, we could. I probably wouldn't do that before we ship the game, though. Cuber Caleb, wait, isn't 4Coder already better than Emacs? Some of it is. The like refresh time and some of the stuff is, but there's a bunch of things in Emacs that I need that doesn't have yet. And so until it's up to that level of functionality, I can't switch. Cuber Caleb, can you go into detail on IO completion ports since you brought that up? No, because we're out of time, and trying to explain why IO completion ports are a good API would take a long time. So that's probably a topic that's better saved for a different day. All right, I'm going to wind it down. Save the blackboard. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you, as always. If you would like to follow along with Handmade Hero at home with the source code yourself, the source code actually comes with a pre-order of the game. So if you pre-order Handmade Hero, the game on handmadehero.org, it comes with the source every night. After I'm done, I upload it, and you can grab it, play around with it, and experiment. So if you'd like to do that, check out handmadehero.org. We also have a Patreon page you can go to support the video series. That's always much appreciated. We also have a forum site you can go to where you can post questions and you can talk to other members of the community or use a annotated episode guide they've put together. It's really handy. And there's also a tweet bot that tweets the schedule used. So if you're trying to catch the stream live, that is the place to check out. Speaking of catching the stream live, I would like to do some more UI coding tomorrow, and I hope you do too. If that is the case, please come back here tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time again, where we will do exactly that. Until then, please have fun programming, and I will see you guys on the internet. Take it easy, everyone.